For the National Museum of the American Indian, there would be some really serious conversations and challenges by people that just would, not acknowledge you as being Native. I remember, in fact, the cultural interpreters at NMAI had started going through quarterly sort of decompression, kind of not counseling, but kind of sharing circles just to talk out the stress and the challenges that they faced on the floor of the museum by people saying, well, you're not Indian, or you don't look like an Indian, or I had hoped to come to this museum and have a real Indian give me a tour. And how hurtful that was. There was a Cherokee girl from Tahlequah, and I'll never forget her breaking down and crying. I think her dad was white and her mom was Native, and she had blue eyes. And the fact that she had blue eyes, like we talked about checking the boxes, she checked all the boxes, but they just could not get past those blue eyes. And they just tore her apart. And so I think that to get your question in terms of stereotypes and Native people and not people sort of not being acknowledged in how they look or dress, it's very hurtful, the liberty that people that take those challenges really have to endure.
Christopher Columbus's arrival in 1492 opened the door for European invasion, forming the Eurocentric view of him being the discoverer of this land. Since then, we have prevailed through a mass genocide that has eliminated 90% of our populace. As Native people, we continue to be depicted as savages, uneducated, and godless. To this day, we are fighting for proper representation. Mass media and Hollywood have impacted how others view my people. The purpose of this documentary is to open the eyes of the misled by sharing stories of fellow natives speaking about their ethnicity, insights on how we are perceived, and the ways they are getting the word out about the real identity of Native people.
So in terms of people's perceptions through media and film, I think there are lots of different reasons why and how those stereotypes kind of carried forward and even into today. And a lot of that has to do with Indian removal. It has to do with tribes that were late in the experience in terms of removal and the Indian Wars in the late 1800s that also aligned with when cinema came about. And so those are the peoples that got represented and kind of really streamlined into, in terms of film, representative of a quintessential Native person. What that doesn't take into account is the hundreds and hundreds of tribes throughout the Americas that had already had 200-300 year experience with colonialism and faced really devastating experiences that had pretty major impacts on shaping the futures of these peoples. And so somehow, mainstream, because cinema of course became the tool that could reach the masses of people, that shaped perception of who Native people were. So you would, someone from different parts of the country, whether it was their traditional dress or the way they looked, didn't meet that, what became a stereotype, then people still tend to discount identity.
Who I am and what I am, it really stood out to me when I moved away to Greensboro after I graduated from college here, and I went up to Greensboro to work for Guilford Native American Association, and I was in a gas station and somebody touched my hair from behind me and said, "What are you? Are you black?" And that's how she introduced herself, was to ask me, was I black, because of the texture of my hair, I assume. And I said no. I immediately was offended, and I said, "No, I'm not black, I'm Indian." "Indian, really? Like, what kind of Indian are you?" And here goes this conversation, in the gas station. And I walked away feeling very different that day, being very aware of how do people perceive me outside of this small Robeson County that we live in. So that would be the moment that sort of stood out to me, as far as when somebody questioned me about my ethnicity, that really made a difference in how I sort of perceive the world and how the world perceives me.
When I moved to Savannah to get my graduate degree, everybody always questioned what I was. They thought I was mixed or Hispanic, and when I told them I was Native American, they didn't believe me. So they thought that all Native Americans should have long black hair, high cheekbones, and dark skin. So my work came about as to show what Native Americans actually look like and who we are and how we live our daily lives.
I haven't really been questioned about my ethnicity, but when I tell people I'm Native, the one common answer that I've always gotten is, "I knew there was something different about you." And then how people will go in and say, "Oh, your eyes are a little bit almond shaped and your hair." So they're really trying to check the boxes of what their perception of what a Native person looks like, and how many of those qualifiers do I check. So it's literally, I've had people read me over in, kind of two rows, for instance. So I get the, yes, you qualify as a Native person this way, but then these things don't really look Native, and kind of get questioned about both sides, where you feel like you have to sort of explain your identity and why you don't have certain things that they're looking for. So that's been my experience about sharing identity. Do I think that how people identify Native people by how they look will ever go away? That's a good question. I don't know. I think time will tell with that as we move further and further down the timeline, and as the world changes. I think one of the most interesting things that will come about, perhaps more insular within Indian country, is what's going to happen, if anything, but it's really being talked about in a really intense way right now, is with the notion of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and with federal recognition. So what happens with how we acknowledge who's Native and who's not Native by who's federally recognized and who's not? If federal recognition just is done away with, if departments are dissolved or positions are dissolved for budgetary issues or because they're just sort of obsolete notions of identity, not discounting treaties and government agreements and relationships, but just looking at the whole federal recognition process and system for that matter. That will be interesting to see how that plays out in the future in terms of how people are thought of as Native people and not thought of as Native people. And then what does that mean to us in terms of how we try to retain and hold on to who we are. It's easy for me to say that I don't give those people a lot of credit. I think I've been in a line of work as a museum professional where I've really made it a main thread in my work to address stereotypes and change people's perceptions and give them at least more information and knowledge, and saying it's a little more dynamic in terms of identity and culture than what you're allowing yourself to filter in and receive and understand about Native people. I really find a lot of gratification when I can walk someone through a museum and they come in thinking one way, and I've totally changed their ideas of who Native people are, and their ideas have improved. They're better than when they came in, and they walk out and they're really appreciative of that. So I think education is important to that. I think as long as we have advocates among our own selves, where we take that opportunity, take that liberty the same way that other people do, and challenge those stereotypes and really say, where did this idea come from?
I feel I've made an impact by getting the word out. In Savannah, nobody had ever heard of Lumbee, so I had a lot of people that were interested in learning about the tribe, learning about the culture. I've traveled to California where, I met people who were asking the same questions, and I was able to share with them. And I also spoke in DC recently and did a presentation on my artwork. So I feel like I'm making an impact and just showing people that, we don't all fit into this little box, that there's a lot more to us than you might see, and that we're still here. We're not an extinct.
A lot of people sort of assume that because you're Indian, you should have this pecan skin or this straight black hair, and that's what we're trying to fight every day against that. As we are modern day people, we are what's left of our ancestors. We are the people who are here because of what our ancestors had to go through.